I'm Alexandra Kreis, and you're listening to Outer Travel in a Journey. Journeying now for 30 years into the life and practice of yoga, I have met many who have taken interesting turns, went past extraordinary bumps, and reached unexpected places. People with whom I shared conversations about everyday struggles, intimate realizations, larger questions, ideas, and dreams. So today, I'm passing on the mic to one of them so we could hear and celebrate the wisdom in people's differences and experiences. Hello, good day. Welcome back to the show. My name is Alexandra, and today I'm sitting down with Barbara Western. Hello, Barbara.
Hello, Alex.
How are you doing?
Good. Good.
Yes. Are you ready for this show? Are you ready to talk to me so that other people can hear your experiences? Yeah. Okay. So
I'm very ready, yes.
you're very ready. Yes. Wonderful. Dear listener, Barbara Weston a, she is originally from Canada, right? From Vancouver,
Yes,
aren't you?
Vancouver.
Yeah, Vancouver. And she spent a good portion of her life in Ireland when she moved there in her 30s, and then she spent a good portion there, and now she is back. Oh, well, not back. You moved to the States. We can't say back. It's after all a different
Close.
country. It's
Yeah.
close by. And this is such a big thing between Canadians and Americans, but we won't go there because this is not the topic while we're here. So Barbara moved to the East coast of America. She is the mom of three
West
kids.
Coast.
West Coast. Oh,
Yeah. Yeah.
Jesus me. Hi.
Even further.
Even further, even closer to Canada.
Closer to
Uh,
Canada, further from the east, yeah. Or
yeah,
Ireland.
yeah. Well, anyway, you're the proud mother of three,
Two.
married two.
Two.
Shall I look at the show notes? This is like the funniest conversation you're going to listen to, dear listener. This is me kind of trying to, from the top of my
We
head,
do know
instead of
each other. Alex and I do know each other.
we do know each other.
It's,
That's why I can do that to her.
yeah.
And she is a wonderful wife to Alan, her husband. Now you're telling me you're not married, and I'm going to
No,
crack
no.
up.
Alan's still around. He's still my husband.
Okay, so this is a funny introduction. Maybe it's a good way to introduce the
Oh.
heavy topic of grief and death that we want to touch upon here,
Mm.
because Barbara lost her brother a while back, and that left her bereft beyond her own beliefs in how deep emotions can travel in us. Barbara, do you want to talk a little bit about where you're coming from? Like a
Mm.
little bit of your background. You're also a spiritual person, and you're also somebody who is dived into the psychology of the mind and so on and so forth. So maybe just you do the introduction yourself
Sure.
here.
Well, yeah, no, you're right. I lost my brother February 2019. We lost my brother, my mother lost her son. I have
Hmm.
sisters and brothers as well, aunties, uncles, cousins. We all were very shocked. It was a sudden death. So we all have been spending this time since February. Well, we found out February 9th, 2019, spending that time just coming to terms with it.
Hmm.
Um, yeah, I suppose my overall feeling about dealing with this death in particular, because all of us have had to deal with death
Hmm.
of some kind or another, very close loved ones, distant relatives. Still, it's all something that we have to come to terms with, all of us. But I just have the recurring thing that keeps coming to me is that there's nothing quite like death, and particularly sudden death. I think that there are differences,
Hmm.
but a sudden death of a loved one to just basically immediately throw you into this place where you're like identifying and engaging in what's most meaningful in your life. I think grief also, with the uncomfortable feelings that come up with grief, because it's uh, there's so many metaphors. You know, people talk about like feeling like they're at sea, you know, without a rudder in a boat, you know, without a rudder, or like
Mm.
waves, like this enormous wave just encompassing you. And all of these things are so true. Like every metaphor was helpful for me in the midst, you know, in the real thick of it.
Yeah.
But
And
but yeah.
you go ahead.
Okay, I just was going to say that you know, my brother and I, we're a very big family. My dad was much older than my mother,
Mm.
and my brother and I were the two youngest children. Um, my dad's kids, some of them were the same age as my mom, you know, around the same age as my mom when they got together. So there was 10 kids altogether.
Wow.
Um, yeah, so uh, I've already lost one sister, one older sister. I lost her to lung cancer many
Mm.
years ago.
Mm.
Um, but I didn't have the same relationship with her because she was much older and I
Yeah.
wasn't living with her or around her.
Yeah.
My brother still had a very close relationship with him. And him and I lost our dad when I was 12 and my brother was 9. So
Mm.
I'd been through this grief. I remembered this grief. It was familiar, still different with a brother, but you know, my brother and I dealt with the death of our father very differently.
Yeah.
And it's interesting how then that, you know, the paths our lives took, how it prepared us or not for more loss in our lives. Because you know, life is wonderful, life is beautiful, there's gorgeous positive things that happen all the time, and then there's loss that it's inevitable, you know. So I feel like, you know, there's things in my past that prepared me. The death of my father, I was diagnosed with multiple sclerosis when I was 30 years old,
Mm.
and my marriage, my first marriage, was falling apart at the same time.
Mm.
So I'd been kind of hit with these losses before and
Yeah.
had to navigate through them. So
Is
it
that the
doesn't make it
point?
easier.
Yeah. And was that the point? Because I know you through your practice and well, your
Hmm.
yoga practice, and I know you were at the time when we got to know each other a Buddhist monk with
Hmm.
a steady meditation practice, together with your husband. And is
Hmm.
would you say that the hen was there before the egg? So did you pick up all these devices and tools to
Hmm.
help yourself, or was it the other way around?
I think it's almost impossible to say what came first because I have very philosophical parents and they would have talked that way around me my entire life.
Hmm.
I think we're doing that. I think Alan and I are doing that again with our children. There's no question is a silly question. Nothing is taboo. We can talk about everything and anything. And so I think questioning was always a part of
Hmm.
my childhood. I was encouraged. I was encouraged to question. And so as I became a teenager and a young adult, the questions got bigger.
Hmm.
And I naturally was drawn to people. And I think people were naturally drawn to me who, like, I remember having a male friend, really close friend, when I was like 18 or 19, who was totally into Taoism.
Hmm.
I'd never heard of Taoism. And he introduced me to it. And so, like, I was always exploring these things, always trying to not necessarily look for God, but but look for meaning. I just always have been
Okay.
interested and fascinated with how things work and why, you know.
Yeah. And then when your brother died, what was, know we getting to know you a little, and so we hear that you're, close to the spiritual world, that you're familiar with different techniques. So when your
Mm-hmm.
brother died, what truly happened? What I mean,
Mm-hmm.
going back to the very moment, if I may, when you received the news, and maybe even
Mm-hmm.
the hours and days after, what
Mm-hmm.
happened?
Yeah. So well, that's a phone call that on some level I was always expecting because my brother had a 25-year history of substance dependency.
Hmm.
And it was something that was open. Our family talked about it. It wasn't a secret. So when I got that phone call, even though I'd probably prepared for that phone call in my head and even nearly had the conversation
Hmm.
with my mother many times, it threw me. I literally had a physiological collapse. Like I just remember falling to the floor. My breath, the wind was taken out of my lungs.
Yeah.
Um, and just being like when you're faced with it, it's the ultimate reality, right? Somebody is born or somebody dies. These are the ultimate realities, and wrapping your head around it. It's like it's almost like being in an altered state of consciousness for a good while. And it was interesting too because my daughter in particular kept saying my tummy hurts and I can't breathe, and I kept saying to her,
Oh.
that's grief, that's grief. We're I'm feeling it too. You know,
Mm.
there was she noticed it. You know, there was a somatic element to the grief as well.
Yeah.
So that, you know, that lays this um, almost like a foundation, if you like, because nothing feels very strong. There doesn't feel like there's a foundation. It feels like it's gone. But that is the foundation, is being able to notice you're still here. I still have feelings.
Yeah.
It mightn't be great feelings. They might be really difficult, uncomfortable feelings.
Mm.
And I always liken it to meditation, where when you're meditating, you're allowing the thoughts to come into your mind. You're not pushing them away. It's not, well, you're trying not to.
Mm.
Sometimes you do, sometimes you might, but you're trying to allow the thoughts to come in and the thoughts to go without trying to manipulate or change them. And that's how I felt about grief, is that I had to let the feelings come.
Mm.
And if they sat there, they sat there. If they started to shift or move, or if something started to, you know, other memories or other thoughts or feelings came up, I just allowed it, because I thought, if I try to push this away, it's coming back. It's not going anywhere. Do you know? So the idea that you know, that grief is something that we manage, or that we get over, you know, like that there's a
Mm.
time period, that's gone. Like I just, you know, I never thought that anyways, but it's just more pronounced for me that, like, you know, people grieve their whole lives for people. And you know,
Wow.
not in a pathological way, not in a way that they can't function, because that's
Mm-hmm.
also something
Yeah.
else. But also the number one thing, like the overall feeling
Mm.
that kept coming back to me was one of love.
Mm.
And and just recognizing that that grief and love are, I mean, they're inextricably linked. That's it, they are one and the same. And that's
Wow.
what's helped.
That knocks the wind out of me.
Mm.
I'm just saying, yeah, it knocks the wind out of me because what I'm hearing you say is that when we, sometimes we need to go all the way into a scenario, and that happened to you, at first. Um, First the diagnosis with your disease, and then that point of subtle grief, and then the big grieveness, or the big grieveness doesn't
Hmm.
exist, I think, as a word, but
I know what you mean.
that's good. And what I heard, what I read, okay, let me reiterate. What it touched in me was that I read lately by a psychologist,
Mm.
who I'm fond of, Gay Hendricks, because he does both ends. He does the psychology and he does the higher belief systems, and really
Hmm.
interlinking the bigger picture. And he says, you can never know what you're trying to numb, or when you don't stop drinking, you can never know what you're trying to erase when you take the painkiller, and so what I'm hearing you say, you didn't have another choice. I mean, the disease you were diagnosed with is something that you don't just, chuck over the shoulder and then it disappears. It's
Mm.
something that requires really, really deep work if you want to manage it, like mental
Mm.
deep work, as I know from Ayurveda, and treatments that you might not first consider. And then the, the next thing
Yeah.
happens is the death, so yeah. And so
Hmm. Yeah.
what I'm hearing you going through is this experience of waking up in a way that's not subtle any longer, in no way, yeah, and then sitting with
No.
it, and yeah.
Yeah, it's that, and it's also like you were saying, what are these things, like what came first, this questioning or this, reading or practicing of, Buddhist concepts, but also, like I would have explored Taoism and would have explored Buddhism and would have explored the Vedic texts when you're studying yoga, the Upanishads and the Bhagavad Gita and
Hmm.
all of the lessons in those books are, they're universal. These are universal truths. They're not distinct to any culture.
Yeah.
So everything that we've read and everything that we've experienced and will continue to experience and read as long as we're alive, I think that's the kind of people we are, and lots of people are that are listening to your podcast are people who are questioning and
Hmm.
always learning. Those things are there somewhere, even
Hmm.
if I'm not thinking about them consciously every day, they're there.
Yeah.
And so, like you're saying about Gay Hendricks, or like I would have read, people like Mark Epstein,
Hmm.
um, even like I have a very political side too, because I believe that the political is personal and the personal is political. And so like somebody like Barbara Ehrenreich, she wrote a book called Smile or Die, which just blew me away because it was it was showing the psychology of like sort of um, positivity, but almost like the tyranny of positivity. If we're forced to be positive, there's something that doesn't feel right about that. So when you're grieving, if people are saying, "Oh, come on," like things, I mean, people do this. It's hard to believe, but people are like, not "Are you over it?" But they'll be like, "Well, think about the good things. Think about the things that were really good that happened." And it's like, well, that's not actually helpful for me
Well,
right
let's
now.
why yeah, why don't we talk about that a little bit? Because I noticed that
Mm,
as much of myself, there is the being uncomfortable or being called out for making somebody uncomfortable in
mm,
naming the obvious, the blatant statement, of like, wow, yeah, you're really in deep grief, is there any way I can talk to
mm,
you, but we're not able. Why do you think this has come to society that we
mm.
don't talk emotion and don't tolerate emotions
Yeah.
on a bigger
Yeah.
scale?
Oh, it's so interesting because there was a part of me that was grieving so deeply, but also a part of me, the psychologist part of me, that was like, oh, this is fascinating watching people reacting to me. You know, some people could not reach out, some people could not contact me, or if they did, it was very surface. They just didn't even want to say, how are you? Because then they would have to hear.
Yeah.
and I have compassion for people who are so uncomfortable with the idea of death, even that they can't talk about it.
Mm.
And I feel for them because I think you this is going to be harder for you one day when you are faced with this, because you know until you start working through these feelings, until you start becoming familiar with the uncomfortable,
Mm.
as well as the comfortable with the whole landscape of emotions,
Yeah.
then it's going to be difficult to face this, you know, enormous loss when it is somebody close to you, when it happens, because it will. Like I used to jokingly say to my husband, he'd be off to work and he'd be going out the door and we'd be having a little conversation. Then as he'd walk out the door, I'd say, remember, everybody dies. Like, because it's like, it's good to remember that every day. It's good to remember, like, that every moment really is a moment that we get to choose how we're going to move in the world, how we're going to think and feel. And, sometimes those feelings are overwhelming.
Mm.
And so you're not choosing that. You're not choosing the overwhelming feeling, but you can choose to a certain extent, depending on your like attachment and parenting and perinatal mental health, and how babies and children, how we're raised, and how that plays out through our lives. So, the choice, maybe the word choice is a little too privileged. I don't think everybody has a choice how they feel, how they react. They don't necessarily get taught
Mm.
those coping skills or those ways to be and think and feel as children. But whatever I was so fortunate to gain in my childhood has just completely just held me throughout,
So
these kind of
what did you,
major significant
yeah,
events.
what did you gain? Because a bit of you broke up there, unfortunately for us, and then you
Oh,
ended
I'm
up
sorry.
almost talking about the profession that you
Mm.
took on. So, and in my head, I was forming. So, how did you guide your kids, and what did you feel? What special technique was it that helped you to cope with it bit by bit?
Yeah.
Yeah, can you go
I
back to
I
that?
I can, yeah. So just talking about overwhelming feelings and how sometimes, I think we use choice a lot in our regular vernacular. I don't know if there's a word in German that gets used a lot that's similar to choice or is
Hmm.
choice,
Hmm. Yes.
but I feel like a lot of cultures, particularly are like Western cultures, we talk a lot about, well, you have a choice if you want to feel this or do this, or and sometimes we're not raised in an environment that gives us that choice. So I just want to
Yeah.
highlight that I'm privileged. I had
Yeah.
a very pretty idyllic childhood. As far as like my father died, that was not idyllic, but I still was raised in an environment that was loving. I never felt like I wasn't loved. And I part of what I'm working with now is a group at the Psychological Society of Ireland, where we're very much looking at the mental health of the family before a child's born, when they're born, into their early childhood, maybe up until school age. We're
Hmm.
kind of thinking about till 5 or 6, but how those years can, they create this thread that that is with us until, oh, well, I know from my own grandmother who died 4 years ago. She was 93 when she died, and
Hmm.
she still remembered things from her childhood. She had dementia, so she couldn't remember events that had happened a few days before, but she could remember how she felt when she was 5, 6, 7, 8 years old. So our feelings, that's basically what I am trying with my children and with myself and with
Hmm.
my friends and with the people that
Yeah.
I love. It's eliciting the emotion, because that's what is going to stay with you.
Yeah.
The events, we can't remember what happened 20 years ago, but we can remember how we felt at a certain time 20
Yeah.
years ago.
Yeah. And then
So,
those emotions get muddled up at times because the brain is very flawed in kind of, it's always
recall.
rewriting memory.
Yeah.
Unless you're in a
Well,
trauma,
then it
then
becomes our story.
yes.
It's our story, it's our narrative. And that's, you know, and I hear what you're saying. And I think that narrative is so powerful, because it's it is what we're feeling. We can't, people are always being told your feelings are valid, or they should be. I mean, I
Yeah.
don't think everybody is, but our feelings are valid. And so we shouldn't feel that we have to manipulate them for somebody, or for some um,
Yeah.
yeah,
Absolutely.
for some
Yeah.
reason other than what is authentic and genuine to us.
Yeah. That's what he's saying with choice, I think. That's what he's trying to
Mm.
distinguish here.
Hmm.
That at the end of the day, if we're not true to our own emotions as much as possible, then we are then we are in the wrong narrative of our own story. And then only if we own our story, we can move forward. But what comes to mind, of course, on the bigger path that some of the listeners are interested in, it's important also not to identify too strongly with that story.
Hmm.
And then I
Absolutely.
liberated myself and I went
Yeah.
deep into, we can get
Yeah.
quite dramatic in that as
Hmm.
well and find attachments on so many levels if we own the story. All right.
Absolutely.
Hmm.
Yes. And it's funny, because I used to speak about that in my yoga classes when I was teaching,
Yeah.
was because there is a distinction, you're right, between attachment, with your loved ones, and attachment to ideas and things. And there there is I like attunement, because I think attuning and sort of
Yeah.
connecting with
Yeah.
people as as best as possible is maybe a better definition, or a better idea of what I'm talking about when I say attachment. Because yeah, then we have like a paragraha, we have the yamas and yamas telling us like, well, we're supposed to be practicing letting go. And it's not always easy.
No, and it's not easy, but what we're not being told is that we cannot let go if we don't own the emotion. And that's, I think, where
Hmm.
we're coming back to your story where you feel like that grief was so overwhelming, there was no other choice than
Mm.
owning that emotion and not kind of putting it away. Hmm.
Yeah, yeah.
Hmm.
And the that's absolutely it, not putting it away because it's not being put away.
Yeah.
If you think you're putting something away, it's you might be parking it. And I do think that there is a time to do that, even to just park something for a little bit, take some
Hmm.
time, right?
Hmm.
But there's a difference, again, all these subtle nuanced differences between that and trying, denial is when you actually don't know you're doing it. So I do sometimes think that that's what happens is people, distraction came up a lot for me,
Hmm.
with grieving, is that like how the whole world nearly is built on selling us distraction. It's like, don't think about that, go buy this. Or don't feel that, like, go feel this, have this drink, or have this, newfound energy powder or whatever. Like, go do something else instead of what it is that you're
Yeah.
doing.
What did you
So
do in those situations of grief? Because I mean, I can quite easily distract myself with a little online game, like
mm,
simple games, or just
hmm,
reading something important, or listening to a good
yeah,
audiobook, or even reading can be a distraction. So
mhm,
what are
it
you
can.
saying here? What happened to you?
I think what happened to me was I began to realize what my motivation was
Mm,
even clearer. When I felt I was moving towards some kind of distraction, there was some days, I can tell you, I was exhausted, because grief is exhausting. And I
mm,
would just be like, you know what? That's what I'm doing today. Like,
mm,
I wouldn't, I also wouldn't add the self-deprecation on top of already feeling so, uh, you know, at at a loss, literally at a loss. So, if the distractions came up, I would play that game, or I would read the book, and
mm.
I'd know I was doing that because I needed a break
Yeah,
from the intensity.
yeah,
But the intensity was still there. It's not like I was eliminating it. It's not like I was going, okay, I'm going to just not feel that, because it was always there. It's still there. I can still feel it, but not as intensely, maybe. But I think I was telling you, I'm just going to show you. This book was, I don't
mm.
know if it's
We have to
reversed,
read it
but
for
this
the
book,
listeners here. Yeah, so that's
yeah,
Bell Books. Yeah.
it's all about love, and it's a
Mm,
book by Bell Hooks. She's a Black Christian Buddhist feminist, and she's also a professor. And this book is her exploration of how romantic love is how we're kind of stereotypically, when we think of the word love, we think about like a heart and like two people. We think about
yeah.
romantic love. This is about transformative love. This is
Yeah.
about how love is in our everyday uh, exchanges,
Yeah.
when we're out and about in the world. Maybe not during COVID, but even in COVID, it's so important. We see what's happening in the world, and
Yeah.
boy, we need more love.
And
Like,
it's so funny how these things come to light these days together with the Black Lives Matters. And you were talking to me and saying, like, ever since I moved, my life has been like one thing after another, like almost drama. Like your brother died. The next thing we had COVID. Then you have the wildfires in
and we had an
California.
earthquake, I was
Oh yeah,
saying. Very
you had a
short
minor.
earthquake, but yeah.
Yeah, you had a minor earthquake. But what I wanted to refer back to is that there is so many new voices, or voices that have been out there for so long and not being heard properly by us. And um, I just listened to a podcast, Angel Kyoto Williams. Are you familiar with her? She's a Black queer
Cool.
reverend, and
Yeah.
it's amazing how these women show up. But funny enough, I have to go back to a male example here. What I wanted to talk about is that when we talk about love, um, sometimes it's so hard to find in these more masculine traditions like hatha yoga, or if you go to a strict Zen school. My Zen teacher freed herself of that, and Kevali Morgan in Portland, and
Okay.
and now I met this man who liberated himself from the Protestant church and, you know, becoming an artist and then a seeker. And he was initiated by a Kashmiri tantric yogini, a real
Wow.
yogini. And when I'm with him, there is always that wickedness and hand, you know, where I've learned so much through my upbringing to be the good one, you know, like you strive for this and you don't let that go. And when you were talking about like, oh, and then I took the book because it's so exhausting to grieve, you know, it's just like, you know, I can't do this anymore. It's like with my period pain, excuse me, male listeners, but it's like that, you know, like sometimes it's just, I can't go deeper in this pain. This is enough of listening to this pain. And I take something, you know, and I heard you saying that. And what my tantric teacher would say at this moment in time, he would say, well, at least enjoy it, you know, enjoy that book. It's not only through suffering that you see the light, but being aware of when you suffer. I think that's the main
Yes.
distinction I'm copping onto after so many years. Yeah.
Yes. No, that's it. It's like, it's not pushing it away, because pushing it away just puts it somewhere else temporarily, and it's there, you know, it's somewhere else inside of you. It's not you're not going to be able to ignore it forever. And like, maybe some people do, but I don't think the people who are listening to your podcast, the people who are, you know, trying to practice something authentically, you know, like it's so hard. I have to say, moving over to the US, I see a lot of variations on practices that I would normally be like, you know, I would say, wow, this is, you know, this is a practice that's very spiritual, and the people who are dedicated and committed are people I want to spend time with. And then I realized, like, there's a whole marketing side here. It's not that I was naive and didn't realize that, but I think living in Ireland, you do live in a little bit of a bubble. Ireland's like this island that, you know, like, you know, living in Ireland, there's something very protective about living in Ireland. And even though, you know, all these things exist in Ireland too, the positive stuff and the not so positive stuff, but in the US, I've seen how much marketing is a part of spirituality and well-being. And so I'm just trying to dive into, like, you know, listening. I was part of a workshop the other day that was on decolonizing whiteness in like health and well-being, because I'm part of that, right? Like, I go off and do my teacher training, and I, you know, and then I use another culture's values and teachings to teach myself. So, you know, it's all related in that I know that I'm doing that, and so I have to just say it, you know, I have to put it out there instead of like ignoring it and being like, oh, I hope it goes away, and I hope that this, you know, Black Lives Matter protests start to calm down. And no, all this stuff has to come up, because it's been going on all the time. It's not like Trump brought it to America. It's not like it wasn't here for years, you know. So I kind of feel like being in America is really interesting. Watching all this stuff happening, and then in the lens of somebody who is spiritual, is seeing this from the perspective of, you know, also grieving. So seeing things very clearly. Grief is incredible. It just pulls this veil away. It's not there anymore. It's gone. You know, everything's very clear. And yeah, I can just see that, like I think I am thinking a lot about what is harmful, what is not harmful. Am I causing myself harm, and am I causing somebody else harm? And that's very much related to how my brother died too. You know, he died. He was supposed to be in Europe. He was supposed to be flying out to Europe the day that he died. We all thought he was in Europe.
Oh.
What he'd done was he'd done a last little bit of drugs. We gather, we will never know, but just judging from toxicology reports and stuff, he was trying to escape a little bit before he had to fly off to Europe, and he overdosed. We don't know whether, you know, fentanyl is a big problem around the world now, and there was fentanyl found in his body, along with alcohol and other drugs. But you know, it's made me think very deeply about distraction and how destructive it can be when it takes
Ah,
over, when somebody doesn't
ah,
have choice. Do you know, that's why I was getting
yeah.
back to choice too, is he didn't have a choice. When you're addicted to substances,
Yeah,
you
when
know,
the
it's
body
not.
takes over, when the chemicals take over. I mean, this happens to me frequently on a different level, and we call it alcohol. You know, like there's
Hmm.
times when I'm very good without alcohol, and it's not even calling me. And then it kind of slips back into my life because I know I'm good and I'm not an alcoholic and I can
Hmm.
afford to. And then suddenly, when, once there has been like a little bit more than usual or more regular, my body takes
Sure.
over.
Yeah.
The body chemistry just talks
Yeah. Yeah.
to
Yeah.
you. And that's why why there is sometimes such a strong practice in the physical practices around, like when to get up and what to eat and when to eat, and rhythmic eating is a big thing. In Ayurveda, you
Yeah.
have this twice a year cleansing, which I offer. And so, just to
Hmm.
kind of re-level and not to come into, not to be too dependent on that. Yeah.
Hmm. Yeah. And restriction too. I think
Mm,
restriction is really interesting because we again talking about America and how much bigger everything is here.
mm,
There's so much about restriction.
yeah.
Oh, don't eat that, don't eat that, clean eating, you know, all this kind of, all these words for it too. The language is so interesting. Um, and I think it's just getting back to psychology. You restrict something and you just want it more. You
Yeah.
know,
Yeah.
it's like all of us right now, we're restricted in our going out, and we just, everybody wants to travel and everybody wants to see everybody even more now because
Yeah.
we can't do it. So yeah, when you're talking about eating, you know, substances like alcohol, which people can use responsibly. I think people can use recreational drugs responsibly. I'm not,
Yeah.
you know, like
Yeah.
I'm not anti-drugs at all.
No, it's not
It's
about that. It's about the choice why you're taking it. Are you taking it just to be distracted, or are you taking it to, have a limited good time? But maybe your brother just
yeah.
wanted to have a limited good time, or you never
Well, I
know.
think he got to that point. No, I think he
Yeah.
definitely, we talked about it. I mean, he'd be very open about it, and
Hmm.
we would talk about it, and he would say, "I like drugs.
Hmm.
You know, they make me feel good." and and what I've talked to, you know, some of his friends and some people who are former users and have been
Hmm.
sober for a long time, they say what they didn't see in my brother was that psychic shift
Hmm.
where he was like, I like drugs, but they're actually not good for me. You know, they're not actually doing, maybe I feel good taking them, but the after effect and the shame cycle and all the things that
Yeah.
come with these drugs, you know, that part he didn't want to deal with. So
Yeah. Yeah. Oh my. So how do you remember your brother? How do you remember your brother these days? I mean, what do you do to?
oh, I just remember him in the most loving. I mean, I remember him as a little boy. We spent so much time together as kids and as teenagers and as young adults. He came over to Ireland, you know, a few times. So we spent a lot of time together. And I just remember how funny, I mean, super charming, a very handsome guy, very talented, incredibly talented musician. I'm I love music. Music got me through a lot of my
Hmm.
grieving too. It really helped. So, you know, I listened to his music.
Ah.
I listened to his singing because he had a beautiful singing voice. That's, I mean, photographs, like there's so much. And plus my mom mailed me down in California. I have a bunch of his ashes.
Hmm.
I bring him with me. Sometimes he's just in my purse. So I just, you know, he's, but that's the physical, right? It's, but he's always with me. I just feel that's that's where language fails us, right? Like, because everybody says
Yeah.
that that person's with me, but he is. He's like, love cannot be destroyed.
Hmm.
So that love is within all the time. And it's, I get to talk to my mom about that. Thankfully, you know, I think it must be hard if you have relatives, close relatives who just don't understand this stuff or don't want to talk about it. But I luckily, you know, my mom and I really are um, able to just kind of go through. We'll cry together, we'll laugh together. You know,
Yeah.
it's remembering him is just, yeah, remembering him how he lived.
Well, thank you for this very long and beautiful conversation, Barbara, and for the final
Thank
words
you.
and wisdom. And may the listener who is in the same situation take some comfort in your words. Mm,
Yeah.
yeah,
I just wanted to say that if anybody wanted to contact me, I'm very happy for you to
brilliant.
give out my email address, because I felt like, especially losing a brother to overdose, I know I'm not the only person. I know just from statistics, there's a lot of us who are kind of silently trying to work out these kinds of
Yeah,
addiction, drug overdose
yeah.
difficulties. So I'm happy to talk to anybody about that.
Beautiful. And if you are the one who wants to talk to her, but we always have in the show notes on my website, we have the contact possibilities. And I also have a Facebook group that is for podcast listeners. So if you want to come on and talk to Barbara, we might be also able to arrange like a live Facebook, and then we can have these conversations for others to follow, or you can, of course, to talk to her privately as she offered.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Well, many, many thanks. Have a wonderful day, Barbara. Thanks for coming
Thank you,
and
Alex. Lovely
going
to
with
see
us.
you
Yeah, very good to see you too.
and to talk to you.
And goodbye, dear listener. See you next week. If you enjoy listening to my podcast, please consider to become a patron at patreon.com/Alexandra Kreis and pledge your donation.